So, you're an atheist. Well, so am I. But the older I get, and the less of this, oh, let me prove this thing wrong, because facts and logic. The older I get, I start to realize that beliefs are a thing to serve us. They don't exist because, science is a separate thing from personal beliefs. And something being technically correct doesn't mean that it's going to serve you. And I actually think there are some aspects of being aware that, God is a concept as opposed to a objective scientific truth. I think that's good that you recognize that. But at the same time, I think what we've done with the modern world, and obviously, Nietzsche's whole thing was pointing this out, that God is dead, we've killed him. The problem with that is we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And one thing that I've been realizing, the older I get, is what are the values of the concept of God and religion in people's lives? Why is this something that we seem to be biologically driven to creating gods and creating religions? I mean, every culture from the beginning of time pretty much has had two commonalities: music and religion. Now think of it this way: if we were to just get rid of music, would we be okay? Yes, technically we wouldn't die. We would continue to live and we would survive, but I don't think we would be okay. I think that would definitely cause some neuroses. I think that music is a very essential part to our spirit. And I think the concept of God and religion is kind of in the same vein. So what are, just objectively speaking, some of the benefits to the concept of having a God in your life? I think the first thing is going to be the fact that you're never alone. We have a lot of loneliness, nihilism. It's very pervasive nowadays. And I think that kind of comes from this Carl Sagan-esque idea that you live in a void, in a cold, dead universe of billions and billions of particles, and there's just nothingness and nothing and more nothing. I don't know if that's really, objectively, as far as we can tell, sure, but where did all of that come from? We don't know. There is always a level of unknown. And I think that's what we would call God. And I think it's not the unknown, it's the unknowable. I think that's the difference. There's this kind of idea in science that because science has led us to understand 90% of the universe, that if we just keep going, we'll be able to get that last 10%, say. And I don't think that's actually true, because in order to understand what something is, right? In order to understand what the universe is, you have to be able to actually see it in context, and we can't do that. And what I mean by that is we can only perceive what's perceivable. So let's say you're on the inside of a car, right? And that's all you can't actually exit the car and say, oh, that's what this is, it's a car. So you can understand the inner mechanics perfectly and how it functions, and you can explain that all. But if you don't know what a car is, you don't really know what you're dealing with. If you don't understand the actual functionality or how that thing exists in context, like a car is this vehicle to drive you and move you around places. If you're only on the inside of it and you can't actually step out of it, you don't really know what it is. And the universe is kind of the same thing in that way. So there's this great unknown, and I think that's what God is. But back to what I was initially saying. When you have this idea of this concept of this higher being that exists beyond all of us, there is this perception that there is this, creator or whatever. You are never alone. God always has your back. And it's just a perception. You don't have to objectively prove that, but that feeling in your gut that you're alone doesn't have to be that way. And that's one of the things that God does for people. The other thing it does for people is like the idea of like Jesus and Christ or whatever the like figure that people worship in the religion, is it gives you an ideal, and that gives you something to aim towards being. And we all have those ideals, whether or not we're conscious of it. And it may manifest in other people, and you see that with like celebrities and stuff like that, that like these people who seem larger than life, we all kind of aspire to be like them. They're kind of ideal figures that we all follow and try to emulate. So you need that kind of guiding light. And I think the one thing that a lot of religions get wrong is that that thing is kind of different for most people. But your God, if you will, is your highest ideal. And the more you sit with yourself and be honest with yourself, I think you start to kind of realize what that thing is. And it's only when you're living in truth and you're living in reality that you can actually understand what that thing is and what those ideals are. And once you're aligned with that, you start to trust your intuition. And I think a good way of putting it is it's what you don't know that you know. It's something you know, but you don't know that you know it. It's unconscious. But it's trying to guide you towards the way that you're supposed to be living, to live a complete, fulfilled life. And this is the other concept that you get from religions. God is always watching. And that doesn't mean you're gonna, be up for damnation. You're gonna, at the end of your life, have like heaven and hell and, have to go to one place or the other. But what it does mean is that that part of you is always watching. So when you act in non-accordance with it, in non-accordance with God's will, and it causes deep shame. It causes deep regret. It causes a lot of negative emotion. And the more we try to be aligned with that vision of who, our highest ideal is, the better we start to feel, the less anxiety we start to feel, the more complete we start to feel. So, these are just some ways of thinking of it. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, and perhaps I'll make more videos on it soon. But I think that this is definitely the thing that's kind of missing in our society nowadays. Because the problem is, a lot of people think, well, objectively speaking, there's no scientific way of proving that any of that exists, and so I'm gonna just act however I want. And that's clearly not really working for a lot of people. It's kind of funny that we think oh, this is, well, why not? Because there's no God, so who cares? But at the same time, we complain about being unhappy and being lonely and being having anxiety and depression and all these things. So maybe we got to realize that maybe we don't have it all figured out, and and maybe we're not. Maybe the fact that it's technically objectively correct doesn't really matter, because it's clearly not serving us. And I'm not recommending that you start going to church and you become a Christian, because I'm not a Christian, and I don't really necessarily believe that these old world religions and following them in the way that traditionally has been is the way forward. But I do think there's certain concepts and lessons that should be integrated into your life, and that you should act as if there is this God, because there is this deeper part of you that is your own God, your own higher self, that if you listen to more and if you're grateful towards that voice for being there instead of fighting it, your life definitely improves, and your psyche definitely improves, and a lot of your neuroses will probably have the volume turned down on them quite a bit. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.